Um, okay, well, welcome everyone to this Rethinking Assessment Masterclass. I'm Roisin Morris-Drennan. I'm Senior Manager in QQI's Research and Innovation Division. One of the objectives of our Rethinking Assessment programme is about advancing scholarship and assessment, and we've provided grant funding to 8 research projects in Irish higher education institutions, summaries of which you can actually find on the Rethinking Assessment page of the QQI website. We think they're really interesting projects. Their areas of focus include the use of technology in assessment. So there's one looking at the use of technology-enhanced simulation in assessment. There's one looking at the use of technology to provide, I suppose, immediate and adaptive feedback to learners. And in that case, I think it's in STEM disciplines. Authenticity in assessment is a strong theme, and there's one project looking at incorporating universal design for learning principles, and one that focuses on building authenticity through working with professional, statutory and regulatory bodies. Several of the projects have an academic integrity dimension, which is obviously very topical in assessment currently, and I know it's a priority for many institutions and providers of education and training. And we also have a project undertaking research in external examining in higher education. In DCU, we're supporting research into interactive oral assessment, which is being led by Dr. Monica Ward, who is the Dean of Teaching and Learning at DCU. There's been a lot of interest in oral assessment recently, I think, driven in large part by concerns about academic integrity arising from contract cheating and the advent of generative artificial intelligence. But as Monica always very patiently clarifies, her research is concerned specifically with interactive oral assessment. So we are delighted that she's arranged today's session to tell us just a bit more about what interactive oral assessment is and why and how it might be adopted as part of an assessment strategy. We are particularly delighted that Monica has invited a pioneer of this research and this approach, Danielle Logan-Fleming from Griffith University in Australia, to share really her experience and expertise of its implementation in the Australian context. Just to note that the webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded to the QQI YouTube channel in the next week or so. We hope to have some time at the end of the session for questions. So if you'd like to submit one, please feel free to enter it in the chat. And Monica and Danielle will aim to address as many of those as possible towards the end. So with that, I'll pass you over to Dr. Monica Ward to introduce a bit about her research and our expert for today's masterclass.
So we have been using interactive oral assessments since the first semester of 2020, and we were very lucky that Fiona O'Riordan, who was working with me in DCU at the time, happened to attend a Transforming Assessment webinar from Australia. Now, you know, the Australians are really far ahead in their kind of handling of assessment and all of that. And Danny was one of the speakers there, and she had heard Danny speaking about this thing called interactive oral assessment, and it really piqued her interest because it seemed to have a lot of the good features of assessment. So we were very fortunate that Danny gave us her time to kind of upskill us on this, and we're very lucky. We have Danny who meets us one morning in DCU online, and it's her evening in Australia. She gives her time to talk to us about it. So we have a community of practice in interactive oral assessment. As Roisin said, Danny is a pioneer in this space. She's based at Griffith University in Australia. They've been doing it since 2015. And Danny is just kind of a wonderful advocate for it. And I won't say much more. I'll hand you over to Danny now, and she'll explain all for you. And please do put questions in the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat. And hop into any stage if something isn't clear, because, you know, interactive oral assessment, we would like an interactive webinar. Okay, over to you, Danny.
Hello, and welcome to this presentation as a part of QQI's Rethinking Assessment Masterclass and Event Series on Interactive Oral Assessments. This presentation is entitled A Message of Hope, Generative AI and Authentic Interactive Oral Assessment. My name is Danielle Logan-Fleming. I'm from Griffith University in Australia, and I'm a non-Indigenous Australian that was born on the lands of the Yagara and Turrbal people in Brisbane, Queensland, and I now live and work on Yunganbeh country on the Gold Coast. I'd like to take a moment to pay respect to the elders, past, present and emerging from these lands, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander or indeed First Nations people who may be joining us today. If you'd like to stay in contact with me, please use the QR code on the screen to connect with me in LinkedIn. In my role as a learning and teaching consultant at Griffith University, I see a lot of course assessment plans. Assessment's arguably the most important aspect of course design. It's the way that we validate our student learning and the worth of our teaching and learning activities, and it's also the way we know that our students are prepared for professional life. As recently as 8 years ago, assessment in the higher education sector was plagued with problems. There was increased chatter about contract cheating and other forms of plagiarism. Assessment tended to encourage rote learning rather than deep learning. And assessment was heavily exams-based rather than authentic, in a sense of asking students to demonstrate their learning in scenarios that they'll naturally encounter in professional practice. Fast forward to 2020 and disruptions first caused by the pandemic and now by technology such as generative artificial intelligence and tools such as ChatGPT, and there is great concern. Accurately and efficiently and effectively assuring student learning is now a wicked problem facing the whole sector. Whilst the affordances of generative artificial intelligence, or Gen A as it's now called, may pose a wicked problem for the sector, in keeping with many of my colleagues, I do not believe that this is necessarily something to be feared. So why am I not fearful? Well, as a student of history, I know that this isn't the first and certainly won't be the last major disruptive technology to impact education. And as was the case with the light bulb, the steam engine, and even Google Scholar, in time, we will learn to maximise its potential to improve the sector and learner outcomes. If we think back to the lessons that society learned from the ancient Greeks, then Gen A and tools such as ChatGPT actually bring with them great opportunity. You see, the teachings that come from the legend of Zeus, Prometheus, and the gift of fire to mankind is an excellent analogy for the place that we as educators find ourselves in today. When Zeus created mankind, he refused to give them fire because he knew that with fire, mankind could and probably would evolve rapidly and exponentially to a point where they could be so self-sufficient that they may no longer need him or indeed the other gods. Now, his best friend Prometheus was a titan. He was not a god, so he was differently motivated and he wholly disagreed with Zeus. He believed that for the greater good, mankind should have fire, so he took it upon himself to defy Zeus and release fire into the human world. As legend goes, fire evolved mankind so far socially, technologically, and spiritually that ultimately, yes, many men no longer even needed their gods. We can view artificial intelligence as a disruptor of the significance of fire. Indeed, many modern-day philosophers have already done so. AI is showing signs of being a new fire with the potential to rapidly and exponentially evolve mankind. In education, we have the choice to embrace it and evolve with this new fire, or to run away from it. Returning to our legend, Zeus was so enraged that mankind had been given fire that he then punished Prometheus and his whole family for this betrayal. One of the punishments was to provide Prometheus's brother with a wife, the first of womankind, in the form of Pandora. Now, many of us will know the story of Pandora's box, but did you know that it wasn't actually a box? It was a pot called a pithos, and it had a lid. Zeus gave Pandora a pithos as a wedding gift and the curiosity to open it, despite strong warnings not to. In lifting the lid, Pandora unwittingly unleashed on the until then very peaceful human world a mass of devastation, destruction, illness, evil, anarchy, and death. For many in education, Gen A and tools such as ChatGPT are viewed as the Pandora's Pythos, potentially unleashing evil on the sector in the form of huge challenges for us all in assessment, assurance of learning, and career readiness. The final part of the legend describes Pandora's reaction to what she'd done, because you see, once she realised what was happening, Pandora tried to return the lid to the Pythos, and when eventually she did so, she was just in time to trap one terrible scourge inside. She trapped false hope in the Pythos before it could escape. In trapping false hope under the lid, she separated hope from evil. And in time, much with all things in Greek mythology, balance had to be restored, and hope took on a new character and eventually became good hope. Redefining our practice to embrace opportunities and hold on to good hope in challenging times is the message of this analogy for us all today. Just like Pandora, our agile response and lively discussions such as these around Gen A and ChatGPT have enabled us to keep a hold of hope that this new disruption will ultimately evolve our practice and the world of work in a positive and more efficient direction. After all, ChatGPT offers a business efficiency to many organisations. Where once a report or a conference room briefing could be requested over 1 to 2 business days, with the help of tools such as ChatGPT, coupled with our own skills in personal desktop research, quality prompt writing, critical analysis, and spoken communication, that 1 to 2 day time frame may well be halved to have that ready before lunch, as workers' skills with ethically and effectively using Gen A improve. Viewed through a post-secondary lens, providing effective education that authentically develops career readiness will build on the work that our schools are doing to equip students with disciplinary knowledge and the transversal skills they're going to need to critically connect their learning experiences with their imagined future selves. Many of the jobs our students will do in their lifetime don't yet exist, and the skills they'll need to do those jobs will no doubt vary over time. Our graduates are now entering a world where interacting with and leveraging the opportunities and efficiencies that Gen A affords will be a desired skill. Our challenge is to find ways to develop skills around judgment, accuracy, and the ethical use of material created by Gen A through embedded practice in our learning and teaching. In this way, just like Pandora, we will continue to keep hope in our Pythos. Today's discussion is centred around authentic assessment. So what does hope look like in terms of authentic assessment? How can we leverage the use of AI and still assure students' learning? Well, rightly or wrongly, assessment is a driver for our students. So what if we removed exams, essays, and online tests and replaced them with scaffolded authentic assessment artefacts that could include the use of AI tools such as ChatGPT, but that can't be purely generated by AI as yet, such as the creation of infographics, lobbying letters, policy briefings, reverse engineered case studies, and virtual tours, for example. And then we include an oral assessment component in the course design as well. Not an oral exam or a presentation, but a conversation to assure student learning. In higher education, this could be more of a scenario-based conversation designed to be discipline-specific and industry-aligned. As a sector, we have been assessing our students in tests, essays and exams for years, and in doing so, generally feel that through these written assessment forms, we've adequately assured our students' learning. So we ask ourselves, apart from student engagement, transversal skills and academic integrity concerns, is there a measurable learner benefit to adding more oral assessment to our designs? Well, if we look at the Australian pre- and post-pandemic quality indicators for learning and teaching data, or the QUILT studies on skill development, we see that our graduates perceive their spoken communication skills as being weaker and less supported than their written communication skills. The QUILT survey also looks at skills such as teamwork, problem solving, disciplinary knowledge, written communication, and also the ability to work independently. Of all the skills, spoken communication has consistently rated the lowest, with only 51.4% of commencing students and 58% of later year undergraduates positively rating their spoken communication skill development at all. This is nearly 25% lower than the rating of the skill development for the area of disciplinary knowledge, and it's a whole 10% lower than the scores for the development of written communication skills. Deloitte's reports since 2019 have also indicated that employers and industry have similarly poor perceptions of our graduates' spoken communication skills. Here in Ireland, QQI's national surveys of higher education students' data, and in particular their 2020 publication, The Impact of the COVID-19 Modifications to Teaching, Learning and Assessment, suggested a move to diversify the form of assessments that are offered to students to include what they called oral interviews. And this was correlated with the students' notable suggestions where they have actually requested oral interviews rather than online exams because the online exams were too easy for students to cheat in. This data is telling. Learning that formatively and summatively developed spoken communication skills cannot be underestimated for the role they play in career readiness, and just as importantly, for the role that they play in the notion of learning for life. These spoken communication skills hold significant social value in fostering positive interpersonal relationships and preparing students for both professional and personal success. As a learning and teaching consultant, I walk beside my academics in their journeys to innovatively reimagine assessment in their courses or modules to be more authentic and also promote engagement, employability, and academic integrity. There are many examples of authentic assessment designs that have been integrated into courses or modules across every possible discipline. For example, there's the shoebox of receipts, often given to first-year commerce students to turn into a tax return, while second-year health students are often asked to create how-to guides on various wellness-specific topics that essentially ask them to reteach concepts that they'll eventually use in their own practice once employed. We've also seen students asked to create infographics summarising and comparing complex reports for stakeholders. And in some disciplines, they're using virtual tours and asking students to create virtual tours to demonstrate economic impact of large sporting and cultural events. My colleagues and I have added to this list, and over the last 8 years, we've longitudinally studied the impact of a new authentic oral assessment model called interactive orals that has been trialled across multiple institutions now in Australia, here in Ireland, Singapore, New Zealand, and the USA. And as it says on the slide, an interactive oral is an efficient and effective form of authentic assessment that promotes skill development and employability, enhances overall student engagement and a personalised approach to learning and teaching, and preserves academic integrity. It's a big call, isn't it? Interactive orals are an unscripted verbal exchange between students and markers that draw upon the students' application of course concepts and knowledge, allowing them to extend and synthesise these knowledge and skills in a setting that is authentic to an industry scenario. They can be designed within any discipline, from business to engineering, medicine to the performing arts. They're genuine conversations where the student may assume the role of an expert and the marker the role of a client or stakeholder. And the two will have a professional conversation appropriate to a scenario that would naturally take place within that discipline in the workplace. In accounting, for example, imagine students developing an infographic where they summarise and combine data from two complex governmental reports, flagging possible changes to policy. Now, an interactive oral scenario that would scaffold that assessment may see the student in the role of a practicing chartered accountant out in the workforce, in conversation with a small business client who's become aware of that infographic and flagged changes to policy and is seeking advice from you on possible impacts for their small business in their particular region. It may include manually adjusting some data for the client on the screen of the online meeting to demonstrate how various scenarios might impact that small business in particular. In this way, the students demonstrating their ability to extend and synthesise the knowledge and skills that they've gained in their prior assessment and throughout the module to inform a new and particular context covered in this assessment design. In this case, it would also include the demonstration of their technical skills in adapting the data to a particular client's context, which is very important to the discipline of accounting and indeed many of our accredited disciplines. Hundreds of academics have now used interactive orals in their modules with thousands of students, and this has allowed my team to propose a model that supports the effective and evidence-based design of authentic assessment, including interactive orals. To achieve the 3 key objectives there in blue, which I think you'll all agree are the intractable competing triad of forces in assessment in the higher education sector, that being student engagement, employability or the development of transversal skills, and academic integrity, then the 6 characteristics in yellow need to be in place. If the interactive oral is scaffolded within a design, it is supported by resources such as exemplars and rubrics, if it's scenario-based, if it's aligned to the program and effectively measuring course learning outcomes, if it is accessible and equitable and professionally focused, then the students tell us that they are engaged throughout their module. They can see the links to their employability and their future selves, and they cannot cheat. A course design that is based on a model that, such as this, detects academic misconduct easily. Students cannot successfully extend and synthesize work in a conversation that they haven't undertaken themselves in the first place. Let's take a deep dive now into what an interactive oral looks like and how to define one. A term often interchangeably yet wrongfully used to describe interactive oral assessments is viva voce exams or oral exams. Much like the difference between apples and oranges, interactive orals are significantly different from all other oral assessment forms. They're not question and answer oral exams or viva voces. They're not one-way in-class poster or group presentations, and nor are they memorised, edited and pre-recorded videos. Interactive orals use conversation prompts, not questions, and the responses are conversational and rich and designed to be two-way. The prompts assist the marker and the student to replicate a conversation that would take place in an authentic setting, such as a workplace environment or a workplace scenario. They're genuine and unscripted conversations conducted naturally with normal communication cues. And this authenticity allows students to bring resources with them to aid the conversation, such as spreadsheets or references or charts, whatever is appropriate to that discipline. Wherever possible, interactive orals are scaffolded to and from other assessments, engaging the students not just in that assessment item, but in all the assessment items across the module. For example, an interactive oral might be the final assessment piece, bringing together all of the teaching across the module, or in some instances, in a capstone module, bringing together the learning from across the program. They can just as easily be first or low stakes assessment, or a mid-semester assessment designed to check student data collection, for example, and advise planning ahead of a major assessment submission. So here a scenario might be that the student is a junior in an IT company, presenting their work for a manager's approval, defending their decisions before it goes out to a client, or informs a larger piece of work being done by the organisation. And of course that's very real world for the IT students. They suddenly learn that the impact of what they're preparing is going to be a part of something larger or go directly to a client, and so it's very important that they're across their work and the decisions that they've made. For our academics and learning designers, interactive orals tick all of these boxes. They're easy to manage thanks to efficient and well-documented administration and student booking procedures. They are evidence-based. The design model has been replicated and thoroughly tested multiple times across many different institutions, different countries, in different languages, across the two hemispheres, making them a very safe assessment design to use. And they're scalable too. At Griffith University, we've run them multiple times in cohorts of over 800 students, and they're going to be tested in the coming months at a couple of different institutions and organisations in cohorts of 1,500 to 2,000 students. They're easy to design and they're flexible as well. They can be offered synchronously or asynchronously, online or face-to-face, and they're considered to be invigilated when they're offered synchronously, which is important for our accredited disciplines of engineering, health, education, accounting, finance, financial planning and tax, for example, and law as well. Interactive orals are engaging for students and assessors as well. The students often report flow-like states when they're in the room, time ceases to exist, they're in the zone, and they come out scarcely believing that it's over so quickly. And likewise for our assessors, they often tell us that they've never enjoyed marking more than when they can sit down and have a conversation with their students about their learning in a very rich industry-related context. Interactive orals also offer a cost efficiency as an alternative to traditional assessments. So in just a 15-minute interactive oral time slot, using a quality rubric, an interactive oral can yield responses the equivalent of a 4,000-word essay, significantly reducing marking time and costs by up to 50%. The value of an interactive oral assessment then is very significant. They quality assure student learning efficiently and effectively. They link to the future of work through the development of valuable employability and transversal skills. They ensure the highest standards of academic integrity, and the universal design elements embedded in the assessment designs ensure that they are inclusive, accessible and equitable experiences for all students and all markers. And students tell us that they can see the value of interactive oral assessments as well. And here are some qualitative comments from some of our various studies. So you can see at the top there, the assessment had real-world relevance. It enabled me to gain professional skills, thereby enhancing my employability. I particularly like the second one there, the specificity. The specific information I needed was not available to be purchased, so I had to research on my own. That student was trying to see if they could perhaps break the system, but weren't able to do it. I really like the uniqueness and personalised one at the bottom there. My assessment is very different to everyone else's. It's based on a different organisation, and it unfolded based on my interests and the angles that I chose. They also tell us that it deters academic misconduct. My favourite quote was from a student that once said, "I can't cheat, I don't have a twin." And that's exactly right. As I mentioned earlier, in my role, I walk beside academics in their journeys to innovatively reimagine assessment in their modules. When they indicate an interest in including an interactive oral in their assessment design, I spend time ensuring that the whole teaching team have a thorough understanding of what a genuine and unscripted conversation looks like to ensure that the design is an interactive oral and not a viva voce or oral exam. So why am I so concerned about that? Well, if we look at the literature, if you were to run a Google Scholar search with viva voce exams, for example, and stress, you'd see it would elicit an incredible number of studies that have been done looking into student wellbeing about those types of assessment. And certainly post the pandemic, we've all become increasingly aware of the different types of assessment and the different types of stresses on our students and the importance of student retention. So wherever possible, if we can design assessment items that are supportive of student wellbeing, then we should really do so. And interactive orals have proven, the students have reported that they're no more stressful than any other assessment type that the students do throughout their semester or trimester, whereas viva voce and oral exams have proven to be incredibly stressful, and in many countries, and certainly for us for a very long time, legislation made it very difficult for those to be offered equitably and accessibly for all of our learners. So when I'm explaining this difference to our academics who wish to put an interactive oral in their course, I use what's called my barbecue analogy, and it illustrates the pedagogy of care that sits at the heart of interactive oral assessment design. And it goes something like this. Imagine you're at a family barbecue and it's in summer you haven't seen your family for a little while, and a favourite niece or nephew has started studying in your discipline. You're really keen to see how they're going and make sure they're on track. Now, you're not going to get in the line for food at the table and bail them up over the potato salad and ask them 20 questions. Quite the contrary. You're going to have a genuine and unscripted conversation, and it's going to start casually. You're going to include conversation prompts around readings, assessments, interesting theoretical directions, favourite lecturers, and future employability plans. Because you care, you simply want to assure yourself that your student, or your relative in this case, is progressing well in their studies towards their future employment plans. Interactive orals offer you the same opportunity with your students, though the conversation takes place not at a barbecue, but in an industry-aligned scenario, where you each participate within a defined role, such as a client querying a consultant, and explore students' learning by extending and synthesising their knowledge and skill in that context. Interactive orals are now extremely popular assessment designs, and our team, as you can see from the infographic here, are partnering whole institutions to embed them in module and program level assessment designs across all areas of study. We have multiple communities of practice, institutional community practice, in 6 different countries, in Ireland here, as well as in Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, the USA and Colombia, who are continually enhancing the design and delivery and practice of interactive orals. These communities of practice have undertaken their own studies at discipline and university level, and are now also publishing their work, contributing to the growing literature on interactive oral assessments. To learn more about interactive oral scenarios that might be appropriate to your discipline, this is a Padlet that offers some examples that will help you to see what others have done and think about how they might be able to be applied to your institution. There are multiple disciplines that there are examples of in the Padlet, so I suggest you find yours, start with your own, have a look at those, and then start having a look across everybody else's, because it will give you some ideas of the different types that are available, either individual, paired or group interactive oral designs, and you can use the QR code there to access that. All of our work over the years has been published openly, and we share our work generously and altruistically, because we know we have a solution to this wicked problem. And you know, when you have a solution like that, you don't sit it behind a paywall, you share it with everyone generously. So my next resource is a link to our ebook, which is rich with design resources. So in here you'll find example rubrics, you'll find example videos, you'll find briefings, you'll find wonderful rich vignettes from many academics who have put their interactive orals in their courses or their modules, run their studies, and are providing short vignettes on the what, the where, the why, and the how, and the so what of their designs. You'll also find links to previous presentations and slides. You'll find links to papers. It's a wonderfully rich resource, so I encourage you to access that and share that with your friends and your colleagues to assist them if they're interested in this design as well. To assist us with the growing interest in interactive orals, and given that we've got quite a small team, we are now looking at establishing 2 regional communities of practice. Now, these aren't to replace the institutional communities of practice that are in place, or indeed that you might like to set up. We really encourage institutional communities of practice to allow you to design resources for your students, your markers, and for academics interested in this design that is specific to your learning, virtual learning environment that you have there, and your LMS and the various technologies at your fingertips. But this regional interactive oral community practice is something that we're looking at this point to see how much interest there is out there. So if you are interested, this is not signing up per se, this is just to give us some data to go back to various organisations with to seek some support for establishing this, because that would then allow us to our small team to also be more accessible to more people over time. So in conclusion, I'll just go here. I'm going to leave you with a wonderful analogy that I heard recently Professor Kath Ellis from the University of New South Wales deliver. Now, she's an Australian-based academic integrity expert and a long-time friend of QQI. And she was recently talking about tackling the AI-induced wicked problem of assessment design this way. If you think about the road to learning that our students take between enrolment and graduation as the climb to the summit of Mount Everest, then whilst it's good to know that a student can hike to base camp, and we ask them to do that in the form of an early first piece of assessment on discipline-specific skills and knowledge, then we don't need to ask them to keep repeating that journey with each piece of assessment. Instead, we can ask them to take a helicopter to base camp in the form of the affordances of artificial intelligence. Remember, in creating ChatGPT, the whole internet was scraped, meaning that it contains fact, fiction, and opinion, and it doesn't really know the difference between the 3. So once at base camp, we can then ask our students to start to scale Mount Everest. We can involve students in assessment types that require them to firstly be across their course knowledge and skills to be able to then make judgments. And this could include interrogating material provided to them through AI searches, either that you provide them or that they find themselves, depending on accessibility and equity of access. Now, based on those judgments on accuracy, applicability, and evidence, then the students can be asked to apply and create personalised and industry-aligned artefacts, or, as we've been discussing, have scenario-based conversations that extend and synthesise their learning to analyse, test, and create solutions to discipline-specific problems. This is an example of a heavily scaffolded design that combines the targeted help of tools such as ChatGPT, but that at the same time develops the students' discipline knowledge alongside important transversal skills in personal desktop research, quality prompt writing, critical analysis, and spoken communication. For me and many of my colleagues, the possibilities for assuring student learning using authentic assessment are now not limited by artificial intelligence to just handwritten exams and tests. Quite the contrary. The possibilities are infinite, providing that we're more purposeful in our design. The conversation around the use of Gen A in teaching and learning and assessment and the development of graduate capabilities and skills in this area really is only just beginning. But I trust that you'll find something to take away from what I've shared with you today to hold on to as hopeful as you consider using scaffolded authentic assessment designs, including interactive orals, in your module designs in the future. Thank you.
And we're using 4 of his sessions. I suggested that, sometimes the interactive, he's from a programming background, so some of the sessions could be used for several learning outcomes. But, would you just like to comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So quite often we don't run the interactive orals during class time. Assessment takes place outside of class time, and the students are able to use a booking system to book a time that, much like you would be marking an essay that's been submitted, they book a time to meet with you, and you run the interactive oral at that time. So it sits outside your class time. So it's not going to use up your very precious teaching time. The only, I guess, downside, if there is one, is that where you might choose to mark an exam at 2 a.m. in the morning because that suits where you're at and your deadline, an interactive oral does still have to be conducted at a time that is convenient for both you and the student. So it does narrow those times slightly to the away from the crazy hours. But to be honest, ever since the pandemic, we've all been working to have healthier lives and balance and well-being, and I think that's an important step there. So for the 100 students, you can certainly if you were marking a 3-hour exam, you'd probably have a 15 to 20 minute or longer marking time per paper. An interactive oral is no different. You just simply schedule it in the same way. Apologies for the noise in the background. We're on the street here. There's a tram. Yes, so I hope that answers the question there.
Yeah, so Ken says, I understand the volume of work, but it makes it challenging. But at the end of the day, it's not for every single module. There's some where it's a natural fit. And Ken, actually, this is the challenge that I'm interested in tackling myself from a computing background. So when I come up with a solution, I'll let you know. Duration. And I sort of briefly mentioned that you can do kind of pre-moderation, moderation during it, and post-moderation. So in terms of being reviewed by the external examiner, and I mentioned that there's recording.
Yes.
So we'd just like to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we recommend that interactive orals are always recorded. And in fact, we've been using that not just for moderation purposes, but recently we've been using that for feedback purposes too. So having a wonderful feedback loop with students. So we familiarise the students with the interactive oral concept by recording an example and giving them an exercise where they mark that example, often with their lecturer as taking the role of the student in the video, and they mark that on the rubric. So there's a nice feed forward opportunity there for the students, and an assessment literacy piece that can be done ahead of the interactive oral to help socialise it. And then we have been having this feedback circle where after the interactive oral, we share back the recording with the students and we ask them to self-assess on that rubric. We take the marks off the rubric, so there's no argy-bargy over a half a mark here or a mark there, but we're actually just looking at the standards. We divide it up into low, middle and high within the standard, and we ask the students to indicate where they sit on each criterion and why they think they sit there. So there's a little box where they can say at timestamp 2 minutes and 1 second, I was talking about this and I did it at a very deep level, and that meets the standard descriptor for that particular criteria. What we find is that the students are very reflective during this process, and that it really helps them see how they have excelled. So we ask them for a very short reflection on what they did well, what they didn't do well, and what they would do differently next time. And for those students who feel that perhaps they didn't do as well as they should, usually it's in their message to themselves is on what they could do better next time is to engage more in the formative activities that are offered and scaffolded all the way through the module ahead of time. But mostly we find that students tell us that they do better, and we certainly see it academically in their results. They do better overall in in that particular module because they are engaged not just in that one piece of assessment, but in all of the pieces of assessment, because they know, and as our comments there show, if they don't do those other pieces of assessment themselves first, they're not going to be able to extend and synthesize that in a strong enough way to be able to get through the interactive oral component. So it does engage them all the way through, and it's important that they are aware of that from the very first lecture as to what they're going to need to do, and they certainly do that.
There was another interesting question. Anne had a question about how long, and it kind of depends on the weighting that goes with it. For ones kind of in the 20 to 30 range, you might do 10 minutes with a 5-minute wrap up. For a longer one, as Fiona's just put in there, we had a colleague who did 100% weighting for a 10 credit module, but she did 30 minutes. So it was a really deep, rich kind of a conversation there. There was an interesting comment from Darren, I think. So it was comparing, the lecturer marking versus, a lecturer, Martin, versus a workplace subject expert who would know what the workplace needs. And I responded, guessing that, like, we would hope that an academic would know what would be expected by an undergraduate student in the workplace. But I don't know if you'd like to talk about
Yeah,
that.
that's a great question. Increasingly, there are what we call pracademic opportunities for our academics to work alongside industry or go back into industry to see what is relevant and spend a little bit of time in there. And there are many institutions that support a little bit of pracademic leave there for their academics to be a part of. So staying across what industry wants is really important. And I was in a session last week where we were looking at engaging industry in not just assessment but content and all those sorts of things in terms of relevance. So you might have advisory roles with tertiary institutions. And the big thing they said is, please don't let it be transactional. We're not an ATM. It's not a one-way. We'll just give you information. Keep involving us. They're very keen to play a part in the work that we do and to learn from the work that we do. A lot of times the research that we do is going to impact the work that they do in industry. So it is a two-way street, and developing those relationships and nurturing those colleagues, not just for one assessment in one module, but just in general right across the discipline, is a really powerful thing that we can start to move to do. And that helps us be relevant, and it also helps our employers know and see how we're preparing our students to be ready for the workplace and to be employable. Much like the data I shared with you earlier, you know, employers and industry are telling us that our students can't speak as well as we need to when they're graduating. That's something we need to address, you know, and we're hearing that through a national level survey. That's quite a high level to be hearing that. We should be more aware of that much sooner. And if we broaden those connections with industry, that will help us to do that.
And if we had those relationships with industry, they could help us to design these scenarios in a more authentic way as well.
They can do if that's necessary. I mean, pretty much most of us can think, particularly at undergraduate level, the work that the students are learning, the concepts that they're learning in our modules are such that we could think of conversations that they're going to need to have that are authentic in the workplace. Now, global warming and some of those sorts of topics we can bring in. It's always great to have experts. And I actually have some academics in Australia who do the examining of the interactive orals. There is actually an academic, I think, that sends students off to the House or even Deloitte, and they actually and I can tell you many of those students ended up being hired by the company after the assessment because they just did such an exceptional job. But that involved training the industry partners to be able to do that assessment. So, it's all about moderation, but these designs are limitless, and we're only really at the as much work as we've done over the last 8 years, there's still so much potential to work further.
So Roshan had a question there. So how open have you found professional, statutory and regulatory bodies for the practice? So I know you've been talking with sort of some of those organisations in Australia.
Yeah, so I had just in the last few weeks, actually, I was invited to Sydney to speak to the Australian Tax Institute and also to the Chartered Practicing Accountants of Australia and New Zealand, who are large accrediting bodies, and they're very keen to include more interactive oral assessments in even the courses that they run. And actually the Chartered Accountants are the institution that have the 2,000 student cohort with 60 examiners. Now, if they go ahead and hopefully in the new year, we're looking at an alternative then to the move back to handwritten exams that seems to be the reaction that many accrediting bodies are having in response to generative AI. And these interactive orals, we've proven it's evidence-based that these still meet all of those needs. And so at least for students, it's giving some variety there, and we're making sure that all students are able to be assessed and develop those transversal skills in both areas authentically and evenly.
Ken has another question. We might give you the mic, Ken. You're coming in with questions. So would you have an interactive board where the student is asked to do something that evidences their skill?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a finance design that we have in a master's course where the students are given some data 24 hours before they do their interactive oral assessments, and the data is to provide some financial advice for an interracial in one of the designs, it was an interracial couple that one of them was an immigrant, and there was all sorts of background to it, culturally important background to it, and their interactive oral was to meet with the client, and they had to provide a spreadsheet of advice. So they prepared a spreadsheet of advice across the 24 hours, and then they go into the interactive oral. In the interactive oral, there are tensions that come up, and these are the bits I love designing. I really enjoy helping academics find the tensions. So it might be that the $40,000 inheritance that they had given in the briefing 24 hours ago, they've just been informed that that's now $8,000. How does that impact the advice? And so the student needs to manipulate that spreadsheet and be able to provide new advice with the client in an appropriate way. The good thing about that is that even though that data is released 24 hours beforehand, and effectively they could ask someone to create that for them in terms of contract cheating, if they do, they're not going to be able to manipulate it and interact with it well enough in the interactive oral for the students to be able to, you'll get caught for contract cheating. Basically, you will know in a heartbeat. And so it's a really authentic design in that way.
And Ken, so in terms of programming, you could imagine a scenario where the students are giving a piece of code or asked to write a piece of code, and then you bring, in the interactive world, you'd say, actually, I want to change it. I want, instead of, for beginner programs, I want to do the max of numbers instead of the min. I want to calculate the average. Or you could get them to code review somebody else's code and talk through the changes that would make to make it more modular or whatever. So this is something I'm very interested in myself, like on the technical subjects. I know you've done it in accounting and stuff. One thing that Danny didn't mention, and I know we're all about the student, we want them to learn knowledge, but actually this is a really creative process in terms of designing assessment. Yeah, Ken, come in, please. Yeah, there.
Yeah, I'm just kind of wondering what I'm hearing now. It might just be the way I'm hearing, or the examples I'm seeing. Is it sounds like it's a tool that's used more at, I'm going to say, final year or later years of a course. Is it used as well at beginner levels as well? Okay.
Yeah. So
all the examples you've been talking about seem to be higher level skills you wouldn't necessarily.
Okay. So Danny, you want to give your example?
Yeah, I'll give you an example of an economics program that use it in their first year, second year, and third year courses. One of each. You wouldn't put this in every course, but they've got one first, one second, one third. We have 3-year degrees, not 4, so that's why there's 3. First year, economists need to speak to 3 different types of audience: a generalist audience with virtually no financial literacy, a generalist audience with quite strong financial literacy, and then we have ministerial type briefings. So there are 3 different interactive orals and 3 different modules. The first one is a conversation that might take place in a family home just prior to a federal election, and one of the family members has got the wrong end of the fiscal policy stick, and they're going ranting about all these bits and pieces, and they're actually quite wrong in certain elements of it, right in others. The student's role is to essentially reteach and have that tricky conversation to be able to reteach the concepts, the basic concepts on fiscal policy or whatever it might happen to be that comes up in the conversation. In the second year design, it's actually a radio interview, so the economist needs to speak to be interviewed and be able to speak to a generalist audience with some financial literacy about some very difficult economic concepts, but do that appropriately. And then the third design is actually a ministerial briefing, where they need to provide a briefing on some complex matters, and within that there's some that come up. So you can see how a scaffolded across spoken communication skills that they will need to apply to whatever context they find themselves practicing in once they graduate.
So Ken, in the case of programming, it might be the first year programmer is maybe having to explain to a Leaving Cert computer science students some kind of programming concept. As they get into second year, they might have to, for a second year might be explained to a first year student. And, you know, in a third year, fourth year, they might be having a discussion with a technical team about, you know, which methods they decide to use in a particular language or whatever. Is that kind of address your question, Ken? Assuming yes. Can I hear you otherwise?
Yeah, I'll get thumbs up.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, so Dennis, here's Akila, and then I'll come to Roshan's question.
So my question is, what do the students think of this? Do they prefer this to traditional exam hall? And how do you get uniformity of assessment experience? So in an exam hall, everybody can take the same paper. In the oral assessment, it's an unscripted. I know it's unscripted, but it's not unstructured. But is there an issue around assuring uniformity of experience?
There hasn't been any concerns about a uniformity of experience because we do that pre-moderation. So in the big courses with, say, 800 students and 10 markers or 15 markers, whatever it happens to be, there's quite a bit of training, or not quite a bit of training, there's one session of training that the markers do beforehand, very similar to the students, where they watch the video and pre-mark on the rubric, and they come in and have a discussion, and then they pair up. Particularly takes place on a previous assessment item, where when marking that previous assessment item that scaffolds the interactive oral, you can have a big spreadsheet, and the conversation prompts that will be used for the student can be suggested at that marking time within the context. And that allows all the conversation prompts to be pre-moderated by the convener before the interactive orals even take place. So there's a little bit of work to do in that realm, but that pre-moderation is also an excellent help should any of your markers fall ill and not be able to take their students, because it means that anyone can jump in there and can see the conversation prompts and be able to apply it and take that interactive oral. So it does help with that sustainability.
So two related questions, one from Roshan, I'll just read it out. Do you have any data on the implications of IR assessment from the perspective of inclusion? And Anne has a question, is there an issue with fairness and reliability? Some students may struggle with interactive situations, being more socially anxious than in written test settings. International students, as an example, having difficulty in speaking English.
Yeah, excellent. So let's have a chat about accessibility then for all of our learners. We'll start with the international students, because when we do that exercise of watching the video and getting them to mark the video on the rubric, quite often our academics, particularly in Australia, English is not their first language themselves, so they might have quite a thick accent, or their syntax may not be completely perfect. And so interestingly, the students with the rubrics, when they're doing that exercise, they try and take marks off everywhere off the video for their English. And it's a wonderful learning opportunity, because there's nowhere in the rubric that we are assessing the students' English. We're assessing the quality of what they're saying, not the quality of their English. And once that exercise takes and everything, really help students to feel with the fact that they're students who study with us through the Open Universities Australia system, who are incarcerated. We have students who are on the spectrum. We have a central group at the university who help our students and our academics to run modified assessment as might need be. So someone might need a little bit longer. Someone might need to do a written response. So our incarcerated students, for example, aren't allowed to be recorded orally or video. And so they have a support person who delivers the prompts, the conversation prompts, and they have to provide a written response, not in academic language, but as they would naturally speak it. So there's all sorts of modifications, but because we're not assessing specifically their spoken communication skills, we're not looking necessarily at their eye contact, we're trying to have a conversation that is industry aligned. There's no changing people who have genuine conditions and their abilities to be able to do different things. What we want to do is enhance and give them experiences that they're going to encounter in the workplace and be able to handle that. So for our deaf students, having an interpreter there to sign and working in that realm. We have run interactive orals with so many different student scenarios now that there's quite a deal of experience there.
Great. So I'm just conscious of time. I'm sure people might want to get a bite to eat before wherever they're doing at 2 o'clock. Does anybody have any questions that they particularly want to ask at the moment? There's a 2-minute video. Thank you for sharing that, Fiona. So it's been, as you can see, there's loads of questions. Danny has loads of answers. Danny is very generous with her time to ourselves here in DCU and also, with Fiona. So we're trying to see, what the level of interest is.
And for just go back a couple more names. No, back, right at the end.
Oh, the
beginning.
end.
Yeah. That one. Yeah, thank you.
Share the screen
If you would like.
Yeah, so I'm keen to see who might be interested in participating in a regional community of practice. We really are keen to work with our bodies such as QQI and in Australia as well, in Australasia. And so I'm seeking sort of expressions of interest. It's not to hold anyone to having to participate, but if we did have a regional community practice, would you be interested in attending? And what would you like to see happen in that session? It's not quite the right one. Just go back. That one. Yep, there you go. So if you wouldn't mind, please, I'd really appreciate some feedback around that idea, because it's a bit of a strategic direction for us. We are a team of 2 on interactive orals, myself and Poppy Soteria do, and we need to be a little bit more scalable ourselves and sustainable ourselves in the work that we do. So this is one of the models that we're looking at. So your feedback would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, well, I think maybe that's probably all we have time for. We've gone slightly over time, but I think we probably could have stayed here for half the afternoon. I'd just like to extend my sincere gratitude to Danielle for her excellent presentation, and to everyone for your really great levels of engagement, and to Monica and her colleagues in DCU and CCT for arranging today's session. We'll aim to get the recording up on QQI's YouTube channel in the next week or so. But for now, thank you all so much for your attendance and participation today. And we look forward to engaging with you soon again on our Rethinking Assessment programme. Thank you.